Mitigation meeting to order. After a brief moment of silence, Ms. Dillinger is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please rise.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get too started, I want to let everybody know on behalf of the board that we've received all the emails, and we appreciate all the emails, and there's no possible way we can reply to all the emails. So we don't want people to think that we're ignoring them. It's just there's been thousands of them. So I know most of us have tried as many as we can, but we do want to let everybody know that we care. We're not ignoring them. It's just virtually impossible to answer all those emails. So what we're going to do is turn it over to Mr. BOE to discuss what he's prepared, I think, for this situation, and we'll talk about it from there. Does that work?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I just wanted, what's in front of you, and this is on our website. We report our numbers daily. That include our numbers of students and staff that have been quarantined or isolated, and then the confirmed cases that have been reported to us, both students and staff. You know, as you can see, as you all look at it, what's been posted today by 4 o'clock, and we do certainly strive every day to post these numbers by 4 p.m. You see we're up to, as far as number of students and staff in quarantine for the district, is 776 as of today, and then the number of positive cases, both students and staff, is 184, with 161 of those being our students, and 23 of those being our staff as confirmed positives. You know, just as a reference, our current number for students, our current enrollment as of today is 8,272 students, and then our total number of employees is 1,077. So those percentage-wise, if you do the math, you know, that's still less than 10% total staff and students in quarantine. And then, you know, you get to the numbers of COVID cases, and you're getting much lower than that as far as positive COVID cases. But it's really what's concerning, of course, is the rate of growth and the increased numbers of positive cases, as well as those that are being close contact and exposed. You know, we started the school year, of course, very minimal numbers, and you all have this in front of you too. Just kind of, and this information you have also goes back to last year. So you've been able to see the numbers that were reported last year as well, and starting on November 30th, 2020. But just to start with our school year, this year, the 2021-22 school year, you know, the first week it ranged from 64 in quarantine with a total positive 14, and progressively each year, each week, it's increased. And as I said, as of today, we're up to the number of 161 for students and 223 for staff. So it's definitely increased quite a bit each week, and so the trend is what's concerning based on our current protocols. Our current protocols, certainly, and what I'm looking at now, I'll get to this in a second, what you see in front of you is the Tennessee Department of Health algorithm. But our current protocol is posted on our website. Everything that, for the most part, everything that we did last year, with the exception of requiring masks. And then what we also have done is we have relaxed some of our practices, that one-way hallways and things and those kinds of things, but we still try to adhere to as much as possible in a 25 by 25 classroom and other spaces throughout the school to adhere to social distancing practices as much as possible. But certainly we continue to reinforce good hygiene as far as hand washing. We continue to reinforce good respiratory hygiene or etiquette as well. Some things that many of us, our elders taught us, our grandparents, our mothers, if you cough, you sneeze, cover your mouth. So certainly continuing to try to reinforce that. And then regular hand washing and sanitizing of surfaces has certainly been a continued practice that we learned and implemented last year. And quite honestly, were practices that were used in the past in most school systems, if not every school system, during flu season. So, to continue to try to keep that clean and safe and healthy environment. Obviously, COVID has been much different this past year, over a year, and then now into this school year, COVID has been much different. But some of those common practices have continued, and we will continue to do those. The big difference, of course, is notably the new strain of COVID that seems to be more contagious. Now, what we've been told on our regular calls with the health department, both regionally and then communications from the state health department and others, it certainly seems to be more transmissible. It's more contagious. The symptoms obviously are they vary with individuals, but it does seem to be impacting our young people at a rate that weekly seems to be growing across the state and in our region. So, all those things are the concerns, and I know the emails that the board members have received and I have, and phone calls that I've had direct conversation with parents and others. It's certainly a great concern, but there's also just as impassioned phone calls I've had with parents about the conversation around requiring masks. So, as you said, Mr. Day, as far as the emails and receiving the input, I think both the phone calls where people certainly expressed their opinion, and they've also indicated that we all are in their thoughts and prayers, and our children and our teachers are in their thoughts and prayers daily. And then the other end of the spectrum, we got calls where they're not so nice, and they certainly aren't willing to pray for us. But that's okay. That's part of the great society we live in the United States of America. And as a public servant, that's just part of doing, publicly serving. But good conversation and dialogue. But we at the whole, as we continue and our schools continue, we want to prioritize definitely lessons learned from past year, especially as we look at our data on what our student outcomes look like, not just in Washington County, but across the state and honestly across the nation. Prior to last year, there was a lot of debate about the impact or the effectiveness of in-person learning versus virtual or that kind of a learning environment. And I think the data last year, in addition to all of the other factors that our society, our parents, our children, our teachers, our communities have been dealing with, you certainly had a negative impact across the board in all areas of our student outcomes. I don't think anyone was surprised at that. Whether you were a school system that did not miss one day and were in person every day last school year, or you were in a school system like Washington County where there were several days where you were completely remote for much of the school year, there was still impact to everyone, a negative impact. So this year, going into school year, we really are all determined, not just Washington County, but everyone across the state of Tennessee, and I'm sure across outside the borders of Tennessee, to maintain in-person learning option for all of our students as much as we possibly can. As we see these trends, and we see the rising numbers, even though the percentages to some might not be, might not seem alarming, but the trend and the increased rise in the percentages and daily is something that is very concerning to every educator, especially including myself and to our board, So, we're just thinking, what in addition can we do to mitigate the spread and ensure that as always, we always want to provide that safe, environment, that healthy environment, both for physical health, mental health, and social health and development. So, we're reevaluating what we do, and we started the year, as I began my words, is our COVID protocols. We were doing everything for the most part that we were doing last year, but what I'm calling upon our staff and the board is, we're gonna increase and be more strict about a lot of our practices. That includes paying even greater attention to how we structure our classrooms and ensuring that we maximize the possibility of social distancing. How we allow flow or plan for flow in our hallways and other closed areas inside our buildings. How we kind of manage unstructured time within our building and even outside of our building. And then also how we provide public transportation on our school buses. One thing I would start out with that is in my recommendation at the end is one thing that we need to do is strictly adhere to the Tennessee Department of Health's protocols and their algorithm. In addition to all of those things to create a safe and healthy environment with the regular sanitizing, the social distancing, the required seating charts at all of our schools so that we certainly know which students are sitting by who at all times or as much as possible. Putting students in groups so that again we know which groups that they're with most of the day. We also need to follow the algorithm that's put forth in front of us very strictly and developed by the Tennessee Department of Health based on CDC guidelines. So that's really not a big change for us. The one big change is around contact tracing. What we have been doing that, as I've found out several districts have not been doing, is we have been notifying if there's a chance that a student or an employee might have been exposed. We've just been notifying, and people, of course, have been both thankful and then both very upset. But we just wanted to do that communication and it not fall solely on our Department of Health in that process. So, we have been notifying, and a lot of times it's just what is causing most of the anger of a lot of our parents, and I understand, is that there's not a lot of details. Just your child may have been, in close contact or may have been exposed, and here are the things we ask that you continue to monitor, and it's all the symptoms of possibly being exposed. But those that are tested, that those are positive cases of COVID, we follow the protocols as far as isolation, and then anyone that's a direct contact needs to be quarantined as well, or if they're an in-home contact, we follow those protocols as well and reinforce that. So, I do want to call up Ms. Wagner just quickly. One thing that I know that has been recent updates from the Department of Health, and that is around masking, around the protocols and identifying those that might need to quarantine. And so I would just ask that Ms. Wagner share some of that insight. She knows it much better than I do.
So presently, to avoid exclusion, so if you're exposed to a positive case and everyone has a mask on, the only person that will be excluded is the case itself. So also if we have someone is vaccinated and they were exposed to a positive case, then they will not have to be excluded either, unless they have symptoms. So the only people that we would be excluding are people with symptoms or positive cases. Of course, with the governor's executive order, we do have some people that can opt out, but we're going to have seating charts. We can look at the case. We'll do some contact tracing around it. If there may be, say, 4 people around the case, if the case had a mask on, those 4 people did, those 4 don't have to do anything. They can continue coming to school unless they have symptoms. If there were 2 that didn't have a mask on, then those would be excluded because they would be considered a close contact. And again, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to do anything either unless you have symptoms. And if someone has COVID-19 and it has been within 90 days and you still remain without symptoms, you don't have to be excluded as well.
Any questions from Ms. Wagner?
I do. Let's say our entire school is wearing a mask.
Yes.
Everyone is wearing a mask. And Johnny tests positive. No one else has to isolate, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
I also want to, in the guidelines too, in general, to the general public, when we're talking about that close contact, the definition is within 6 feet. But in the K-12 environment, there's some other additional stipulations. It kind of adjusts down to 3 to 6 feet. So, there's a little bit smaller radius possibly, but that's specific to K-12 education as we look at who might have been in a close contact in our classrooms and in other areas inside our schools. The point there is the way that the exclusion practices in school systems, and certainly don't like that word, but it's just the word and how it's defined. Our authority is to exclude, and then specifically identifying for quarantine or isolation is certainly in the hands of the Department of Health. But we exclude, and then I guess the formal designation would be depending, of course, on what kind of exposure and what's their status based on the Department of Health and medical diagnosis. Anyway, we just share all that because that is part of a recommendation. We need to strictly adhere to the Tennessee Department of Health. Districts across the state have had some flexibility and based on local policy to kind of stray off of that if they so choose based on local policy. And we followed the protocol closely, except not 100%. And my recommendation includes that we follow those protocols exactly as they are recommended by Tennessee Department of Health. As I move through additional items, it was mentioned, Ms. Wagner mentioned the governor's executive order. Certainly, that came out on Tuesday, is my understanding and experience, and that changed the conversation, of course, for all of us. We've had a lot of heated discussion around it was either or, and really this board and also including myself, we've been pretty strong on the idea that parents certainly, and especially with the health and wellness of their children, they know best, and we certainly support that and want to continue to support. But as I mentioned, we're just in a situation in a closed environment like a school setting, we have to take additional steps, I believe, at least temporarily, and be responsive if we do make changes and the mitigation strategies don't seem to work, then I don't know that we continue those. I think, and then also if we see that they work, we decide how much longer would we do it. If we think it's lowered the number of positive cases and quarantines, isolation numbers to an extent that we feel like we can certainly maintain an environment where everybody has a choice as far as whether to wear a mask or not, then I certainly encourage the board. That's a discussion that has to be had. But right now, just based on in looking at our individual schools, we do have some hot spots. But the thing that's alarming, and not just in Washington County, regionally and then across the state, is just that steady, a very persistent growth curve that we're seeing that's impacting not just those that are ineligible to be vaccinated, our 5-year-olds to 11-year-olds, and we also have in our schools younger than 5-year-olds in our pre-K programs, but they're not eligible for vaccinations. And we have many high school students, even though they're eligible, whether it's a choice of their family that they should not be vaccinated, or they just, as an individual themselves, they choose they don't want to be vaccinated, and that's certainly a personal choice. But just the fact that we don't have a high rate of vaccination both in our community, in our region, that's another cause for concern. So that requires also to consider the additional mitigation strategies. So before I get to my recommendation, I do want to address some questions that I've had, and even I've had contacts, and I'm sure our board has too, about the concern about us going back to a remote model. If we could just shut down schools and go back to a remote model like happened last year. Well, in April of this year, our State Board of Education changed the rule that school systems, unless it's an emergency declared by the governor, school systems do not have that option. We do not have that option of having our traditional school setting, and then we decide, well, next week we're going to go remote for the next 3 weeks for all of our schools. We don't currently have that option as a public school system in Tennessee. We do still have the option that families, parents, can enroll in a full-time virtual. That's really what the rule says. You don't have the option to do a hybrid model or remote model and go back and forth. You can, if you have a state-approved virtual school, your parents, your students can be enrolled full-time virtual if you do provide that. But there's not what we saw last year in both Washington County and across the state, where there were these routine decisions. Some, as I said, never went into a remote environment or a hybrid model. Some stayed in person all year, but many districts went back and forth, in and out, to remote, hybrid, in person, back to remote. And again, based on last April's ruling by the state board, we do not, as a school system, have that option. We can, however, as we would have had the option when we had flu epidemics, or just a high incident of flu, we can send students on homebound. So if they're quarantined or isolated, they're essentially in a homebound situation, and we still can provide instruction. It's very difficult, especially if you got pockets of students, but as we're doing now, we're doing packets going home if somebody's been identified and excluded from school, or in our high schools, all of our high schools have classrooms that are in our learning management system, digital resource, and they can access those from home as well, and teachers can interact with students and look at their assignments and give feedback that way. So we still are allowed to do those, but the idea and what it looked like last year is just not permissible for public school systems right now. So that was a concern of many parents. I hear a rumor that you're going to go remote like last year, and my response is, well, that's not an option for us. We do have a 6 through 12 virtual school. Parents have enrolled some of their children. They made that decision at the beginning of the year to enroll their children in our 6 through 12 virtual school. And as a board, we made a decision based on just the concern of ineffectiveness in a K-5 environment for a full virtual school. We as a board made the decision, or you as a board, we as a school system, that this year or every year thereafter, we're not going to be able to provide a K-5 virtual school, 100% virtual school. So right now in Washington County, just trying to make the point, we don't have the option, like any school system in Tennessee, to go remote or hybrid. We just don't. That's not an option in our toolbox. But we do have a virtual school, but individuals have to be full-time enrolled in a virtual school. And in Washington County right now, we only service we can provide is a 6 through 12 virtual school option. We did have a deadline for enrollment that was originally set for August 13th. But individually, as I've had parents call me and Mr. Gray, the principal of that school, we certainly look at individual cases and circumstances, and certainly deadlines are absolutely important, but we also but the individual circumstances of individual families is also important. So we're still trying to keep that option open to families based on their situation. I just licked my fingers through my mask. That's funny.
How'd that work?
That didn't work very well. No, sir. Okay. So, given our upward trend and also just our current policies, I put in front of the board what I make in form of a recommendation. As I've already said, the one thing I've said is we strictly adhere to the Tennessee Department of Health Public Health Return to School support algorithm that's on the Tennessee Department of Health website, that we have been referencing, routinely, but we strictly adhere to every step in that protocol. And then we also strictly adhere the protocols for assisting public health with close contact identification for COVID-19, which means we cooperate fully with our local regional health department in the contact tracing process. But the other big recommendation, based on just tightening up and strengthening our mitigation strategies, is that as of Monday, August 23rd, 2021, I recommend that we go back to a required mask for all students, staff, and visitors while indoors in our school buildings and on our buses. But certainly recognizing the practice that we've had prior to this is aligned to the governor's executive order, except that we ask that parents wishing to opt their students out of the mask requirement do so by completing the opt-out form and submitting that to their student schools. We will make that form available by the end of day tomorrow on our websites, and also we want to, any hard copy forms, we want to make sure our schools have them in hand before the end of the day tomorrow to send home with their students if they would like. But the opt-out form will be available to all parents for their children, and then any of our students that are 18 years old, they certainly can complete and submit that opt-out form themselves. But those two recommendations, I do suggest that we set a timeline and that we review and reevaluate this action if it's approved. And I suggest that we do it the next board workshop, the next scheduled workshop. It's not scheduled to be a special call meeting or a regular meeting, but I suggest that we plan on a special call meeting prior to the workshop on Tuesday, September 21, to review our data from that after those 4-week period, and then the board certainly make any decision from that point that they want to make changes and any further adjustments, and that would just be a good time period to consider that as a timeline. So with all of that in front of you, I make that request that you consider that as a motion, and I recommend it as submitted.
Ms.
I
Dellinger.
make a motion, we accept this recommendation based on, and do I need, I guess I don't have to read it all, do I, based on your...
Be up to our...
I probably need to add September 21st.
She has the, if it's as recommended and written, she will put it in public
and,
record.
To go till September 21st.
Wait, ma'am.
Oh, maybe, I'm sorry. No.
You want to go till October?
No.
No, sir, the governor's executive order expires October 5th, but I think it's important for the board to come back prior to that time to evaluate the information we have over these next 4 weeks, and certainly not wait until the
Okay.
governor's order expires.
So,
Well, let's look at something real quick. So September 21st is our workshop?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you good with that, Mary Beth?
so to run through September 17th, you want it to be before then?
21st.
21st,
It
okay.
continues, you will meet on the 21st, and you can decide at that
Sure,
time
sure.
to return to a fully optional option
That sounds
or
good.
any other changes, but that's just to review what the data looks like at that point, and the board can have a discussion and make a decision from that point forward.
Sounds good.
We got a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Riddle. Any more discussion?
I've got one question.
Yes, sir.
How are we going to police this? Any idea?
Very difficult, and realistically, what we'll work with our principals and our teachers, and the idea of policing, I think it's really about communication with parents, and then following our protocol about making sure we support the Department of Health on identifying those that would need to be isolated and quarantined. But our teachers in their daily attendance, I think they should encourage and support and model mask wearing. But they also, I want to make sure, because I've had a lot of, both across the state and even in the region, there's a lot of discussion about we should isolate students because of choices that they make or their families make. No. I think we We asked our teachers to note, what their classroom looks like when they take attendance, and encourage and support our students, and support those families that both opt out, and then those families that certainly require and expect their students to wear masks. And as a professional staff, we're going to model, we're going to wear a mask. Our teachers should wear a mask anytime they're around children, and they certainly, if they can't be more than 3 feet or 6 feet away. If they're in front of the classroom, I think it's a good idea, because students need to see their facial expressions and mouth. But if they're in close proximity of students, they need to keep their mask and wear them correctly. But when they're not around students and they're in their room and playing on their own, or they're in another area of the building where there's no students, I certainly believe they can lower their mask. And then also encourage, and we'll strongly encourage, that our principals look at strategies to ensure that our students have regular opportunities to have mask breaks throughout the school day. Those that are wearing masks, especially time outside. Of course, the mask requirement would not apply. We should be able to social distance outside, where there should not be a concern or discussion about mask requirements outside. So we want to plan accordingly. But inside, I think even inside, if we have opportunities for our students to just pause and take a mask break inside, we need to be doing that.
Could this also mean the clear shield?
Yes, mask is face covering.
So
That's
that would
something
include both?
I think as a teacher, and
They can
we
make that
we
judgment.
will certainly provide and have in the past those face shields, particularly in the early grades, where the facial expressions and students need to be able to see the words coming out of their mouth.
Exactly.
So I think the face shields are certainly appropriate. But that's a choice, I think, individual choice of our teachers. But I would encourage the face shields if they feel comfortable wearing those.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Roll call vote, Jennifer.
Mr. Masters?
Yes.
Mr. Riddle?
Yes.
Mr. Irvin?
No.
Miss Buchanan?
Yes.
Mr. Day?
Yes.
Miss Dellinger?
Yes.
Mr. Fleener?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hammond?
Yes.
Mr. Meredith?
Yes.
It carries.
Okay. Anybody got anything else, Ms. Dellinger?
No.
Something we'll say?
We adjourn.
All right, meeting adjourned.
No, he's not.